It is not uncommon to hear people say that China does not often develop their own military designs, and instead steals, purchases, or copies designs from other nations, including adversaries like the United States. But what does this really mean? Let's talk about it through the lens of aviation design over the past few decades. Let's start with China's Chengdu J10, a single-engine multi-role fighter that bears more than a passing resemblance to America's own F-16. And for good reason. You see, back in the 1980s, Israel was developing a similar single-engine multi-role fighter they called the Lavi, with a great deal of help from the United States using F-16 designs. Once that Lavi program ultimately fell through, Israel turned around and sold all of their plans, including a great deal of classified information pertaining to the F-16, directly to China, which they promptly used to build their Chengdu J10. How about China's Shenyang J11, and then the J16 that matured out of it? This one was a bit more direct. Back in 1989, the Soviet Union was facing significant economic trouble, and China took advantage of that to purchase the design and production line for the Soviet Su-27, which promptly became the J11. And then in 2000, China went back to Russia to purchase a slew of new design upgrades that ultimately manifested as China's J16. What about China's carrier fighter, the Shenyang J15? Well, that one also has Soviet roots, but this time the Russians wouldn't play ball, so China went around them. You see, the Russian Su-33 is really a carrier-capable version of the Su-27, but when China went to Russia to try to purchase this design, Russia wouldn't sell it to them. So China turned to Ukraine, which was no longer a member of the Soviet Union and happened to still have a single Su-33 prototype still laying around. So China bought that jet from Ukraine and reverse engineered it to produce their J-15, though didn't pan out all that great. How about China's FC-1, also known as the JF-17, which is in service for China and for Pakistan? Well, that one's a bit more convoluted. This time, China took the design for the Soviet MiG-21, which they purchased fair and square from the Soviet Union, and then they took the Lavi designs that they purchased from Israel and effectively produced a MiG-21 with an F-16's nose and tail. And as weird as that may sound, the end result was a lot more capable than a MiG-21, and is still in service today. And then we have the new crop of Chinese stealth fighters, the J20 and the FC31. Now, many people say the J20 is a direct copy of the F-22, but it definitely isn't, as you can tell just by looking at its overall layout. But what it is an amalgamation of Lockheed Martin's stolen design cues incorporated into the now defunct Soviet MiG-144 stealth fighter effort. Now, the MiG-144 predates the Su-57 program and was meant to be an early Soviet stealth fighter that was ultimately canceled. Now, Russia has directly accused China of stealing their MiG-144 design, but admittedly, most of the evidence is circumstantial. And the same can't be said for the Lockheed Martin design elements, because those were stolen by a Chinese national named Su Bin, who was ultimately arrested, charged, and imprisoned for the theft. And his emails back and forth with the Chinese government made it evident that they were looking to steal stealth design elements from these Lockheed Martin efforts, which of course leads into the FC31, also known as the J35 or J31. This is the latest stealth fighter in development for China, which was really designed from the onset for the export market, but will likely ultimately become a replacement for the J15 on China's aircraft carriers. Pakistan has actually recently expressed interest in purchasing these FC31s, which are said to be China's response to the F-35, despite being a twin-engine platform. They're supposed to be smaller and cheaper than a J20 while still delivering some degree of low observability. This program has obviously been in development for some time, and you can once again clearly see those Lockheed Martin design cues. Now, let me be clear. China has invested a significant amount of money into military R&D in recent decades, and they don't rely solely on stolen and purchased foreign designs for their military platforms. But one thing China definitely does do is steal or purchase designs to help offset the cost of research and development. After all, why spend all that time and money designing a stealth fighter when you could just steal a stealth fighter design and add some canards? But this may ultimately not pan out for China in the long run unless they can find a way to invigorate the sectors of their R&D apparatus responsible for cutting-edge experimental technology. After all, stealing or purchasing technology from other nations can provide a very effective shortcut to catching up with them. But it can also allow your experimental technology apparatus to atrophy. And whether or not that will ultimately happen to China, only time will tell.
Yeah.